Hey team, and welcome back to another video in our Astrological Basics series. In our previous installments of this series, we have primarily been focused on how to read or engage with an astrology chart. This is different from interpreting one, where you take what the chart shows you and utilize that symbolism to convey meaningful or practical predictive information to another person. We have to be able to read the chart to be able to understand what it's even trying to tell us before we can do that, so I felt that was a helpful starting point. But from this point in our series, I wanted to take a step and more talk about the more practical interpretive parts of astrology and how we can sort of begin to piece those together, beginning with the discussions about the planets. This video, we're going to primarily talk about an exploration of sort of like the meta view of what planets are in astrology. What are the planets? Why do we have the planets? What do they do? What makes something a planet? And this is going to be sort of like the beginning video in a series on the planets individually, so look forward to more of those coming out in the future, where we will take the time to discover and to talk about each of the planets as their own thing in their own dedicated video. In today's video, we're going to take some time to talk more about the ideas behind planets. What are they? What do they do? Where do they come from? Kind of a thing. And while some of these questions may seem pretty easy, the actual answers of them, as we shall see, is anything but simple. So when it comes to the original definition of planet, the definition that we have sort of been handed down to us since antiquity, it comes from a phrase, a Greek phrase, asteres planetae, or wandering stars. This refers to a small select group of stars who can be seen to visibly change position in the night sky from night to night or over an extended period of time. This is in direct contrast to all of the other stars in the sky, which are referred to as the fixed stars. The fixed stars are sort of what we normally think about when we think about the word stars. They're all those other light points out there, basically. The fixed stars are so-called fixed because they maintain their position and their distances in relation to one another. They do not experience their own individual motion. They move together as a group in what's called primary motion or diurnal motion, the rotation that basically makes the sun rise, culminate at noon, and set. The stars do this as well. You'll see constellations, rise up in the east, culminate, and then set in the west. But even though they do this motion daily, they do not have their own individual motions to where, like, for example, the shapes of the constellations, the configurations of the stars in them are not changing over time. This is very different from the planets, who, while they also participate in this diurnal motion of rising, culminating, setting, and anti-culminating, they have their own unique motions that carries them through the zodiac or across different star groupings night after night or over an extended period of time. This is most easily observable, most readily observable with the moon, who you can go out and look tonight and see that she will be with these stars, and then tomorrow night you can go and look at her again, and she will have moved a considerable distance in the sky to now be with, another group of stars. The other planets do the same thing, but it takes a little bit longer for them to be able to move across. While the moon moves roughly half a zodiac sign a day, the next fastest planet is Mercury, who moves about 1 degree a day, or about 1/12 of the speed. So while you might not notice a discernible, difference in position night after night with some of the other planets, you will notice it over the course of a couple of weeks or several months. This unique observable motion only occurred with 7 individual bodies: the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. This emphasized these bodies as important, as significant, as things worth watching out for, and this motion that they have allows them to move into and out of different zodiac signs. It allows them to move into and out of different configurations with one another, and it allows them to indicate and signify change in the universe or in astrology. This emphasizes them as being important, significant, something to keep an eye on, and it's why these 7 have become the traditional planets that form the foundation of astrology even today. This ancient definition, or this ancient criteria, which may be a better way to describe it, sort of divided the sky into 2 groups. You have your 7 wandering stars, and everybody else who is a fixed star, who might be important in certain circumstances, but generally it is the planets, the wandering stars, that we focus on more. And this was just sort of the way of it for several centuries, nearly 2,000 years, until the discovery of Uranus in 1781. Uranus's discovery was a pivotal point in the fields both of astronomy and astrology, astrology for many reasons, but primarily for our purpose, it indicated a couple of things. One, that Uranus was the first previously invisible planet that we could not see with our naked eye, that we discovered, that we could interact with. Not only did this, open up a new possibility of how this can be incorporated or used in astrology and astronomy, but also the idea that maybe there's more out there than what we had initially thought. So while Uranus is not easily observable to the naked eye, only capable of kind of crossing that threshold of visibility a couple of times a year, and only under like the most pristine observational environment, it did have its own motion, its own discernible motion, as opposed to or against the backdrop of fixed stars. So Uranus was sort of incorporated as a planet, even if it was not necessarily an observable planet in the same way that the other 7 had been. At the same time that this kind of discovery of Uranus is happening, there's also another conversation happening with naturalists, philosophers, and astronomers about the structure of the universe. Today, famously, astrology incorporates or operates from a geocentric universe. Astrology is about the celestial events that happen around Earth and how it impacts the Earth and people on it. So we are very focused on that Earth-centered perspective. Other sort of less subjective disciplines aren't super concerned with that. So they are looking for a little bit more of a more objective viewpoint. And this is where the heliocentric model or the sun-centered model of the universe starts to gain ground as sort of the way that the universe should be, conceptualized or ordered, with the sun in the middle and all the planets, including the Earth, circling around it. This changes some of the conversations or categorizations of what had previously been considered as planets. For instance, the sun had previously been considered a planet, but at this point in time is starting to become conceptualized more as a star. Similarly, the moon, who astrologers have and continue to use as a planet, is being considered more of like a satellite to the Earth, especially more so after the discovery of Jupiter's moons. So that means that around 1800, you have the sun and moon out as planets, but Uranus and the Earth in as planets. Things got a little bit more complicated for the conversation of planethood in 1801 following the discovery of Ceres. Ceres is the largest asteroid in the asteroid belt that exists between Mars and Jupiter, and upon its discovery, Ceres was considered a planet and, joined the rest of them. In 1802, we had the discovery of Pallas, who became a part of the Planet Club. In 1804, we had the discovery of Juno, and then in 1807, there was the discovery of Vesta. So just in the span of a decade, the number of planets jumped from 7 to 11. And that was just sort of the way of things for almost 40 years until the discovery of Neptune in 1846. Neptune, another invisible, unobservable planet, but was able to be tracked with its own unique motion against the backdrop of fixed stars, became incorporated as a planet. And then something happened where in the last part of the 1840s, a rapid succession of discovery of bodies in the same vicinity as Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta really started to call into question their status as a planet. Between 1845 and 1849, 6 other planet-like bodies were discovered in this vicinity, and more would be discovered, in the years following. This initiated a reclassification movement where the term asteroid was first proposed, meaning star-like, in reference to how they appeared in telescopes, as a new grouping for these bodies specifically, and others discovered it in the future that kind of fit the same mold. This did not make the definition of planet more secure or more certain. What it did was it basically made planet a definition by omission. If it wasn't a star, if it wasn't a satellite, if it wasn't an asteroid, it was a planet. In 1930, we had the discovery of Pluto, who also sort of fit this definition of planet by omission and was considered a planet for nearly 70 years, and sort of forms the core 10 planets of astrology that many people will be familiar with today. Modern astrology primarily operates off of a 10-planet framework, including the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And that sort of is where it exists even today. However, famously, in 2005, we had the discovery of another planet-like body within the vicinity of Pluto, who was actually larger than Pluto, Eris. This started a very similar conversation to the one held in the 1840s regarding the planetary status of Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta, this time with Pluto and other Kuiper Belt objects who were continuing to be discovered, every month, it seemed like, in 2005. Ultimately, this led to Pluto's demotion as a planet in 2006, and for the first time since antiquity, a redefinition of planet to actually include measurable criteria as opposed to just things that felt right. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union voted not only to demote Pluto, but also to define a planet as a body that has three specific things. First, has enough gravity to make itself spherical. The second, orbit the sun, and the third, be large enough in mass to have cleared its area of orbit. This part is the criteria that Ceres and Pluto failed. Because of this, another class of body, the dwarf planet, was proposed to include Pluto, Ceres, Eris, and any other potential future discovery that would fit 2 out of 3 of these criteria. In response to this news, astrologers rebelled and, in my opinion, really dropped the ball on an important opportunity to reclassify planet, or the term planet, for astrology, like an astrological definition of what a planet entails. It is not unheard of for astrologers to utilize celestial bodies that astronomers have not classified as planets. We have been using the sun and the moon for thousands of years and have held them at the same esteem and in oftentimes greater esteem than the other traditional planets. Astrologers famously did nothing, instead choosing to react to the news with denial, saying that of course Pluto was still a planet and that astronomers had no jurisdiction over the field of astrology and what it used, and that astrologers basically just didn't have to listen to astronomers, which I guess is partly true, but also rings a little hollow, considering that many of the significations of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and any of the other newly discovered celestial bodies are derived almost entirely from the name and the mythology surrounding the name that astronomers assign to it. So it seems a little silly to say that astrologers don't have to listen to astronomers and how they decide to name or categorize things, when obviously we have. Like, we've just followed along with it until we didn't like it anymore. And instead of trying to take the reins and take control of the narrative and come up with a definition of planet to some extent, astrologers have done nothing. And I guess maybe it isn't so ridiculous to think that that is what happened, since even astronomers themselves waited until, for thousands of years to come up with an actual workable definition of planet from the ancient Greek wandering planet that we had used forever. And even today, this conversation about what is a planet or what makes a planet is something that astrologers aren't super ready to have or willing to have, at least in the corners of the community that I am most involved in. I admit that this might be a conversation that I'm extra sensitive to or aware of, because around 2005 and 2006, when Eris's discovery, Pluto's demotion, and the talk about the definition of planet was happening, were the times, this was when I was first getting interested in astrology seriously. So these were literally the conversations that were being had about astrology or about planets while I was starting to get involved in it. So I admit that I might be sort of biased in this discussion, because I feel like it was really an opportunity that astrologers just did nothing with. If you asked 10 different astrologers to tell you, what a planet was on a meta level, what is it that makes something a planet, or that criteria to planethood, you would probably receive 10 different answers, as every astrologer would try to include criteria that fit with whatever bodies they most normally utilized in their practice, which is fair. I'm not calling it out necessarily, but just that it's messy. So when it comes to answer the question of what does it take to be a planet in astrology, unfortunately I do not really have an answer for you. For myself, my own personal answer to this question has been to basically just utilize the 7 traditional planets of the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and regard everything else as just sort of extra, or as more star-like than I would normally. This has helped me have sort of a logical barrier of classification to sort of better sort out and filter information that may or may not be important, not only in, consultations, but also in sort of more philosophical questions or discussions surrounding astrology. It's just easier to pretend like there are only 7 planets, because that's what the system of astrology was built around anyway. However, I also understand that that answer may be unsatisfactory to a lot of people. It's just difficult for me to come up with criteria that, would fit Uranus and Neptune, but not also fit whatever Kuiper Belt, unnamed Kuiper Belt object might also be out there, as to sort of tell who or what is important. But when it comes to our next question of what planets do, I have a much more satisfactory answer for you. Harkening back to the original definition of planet as a wandering star, with motion being the primary vehicle of change in the universe, that is what planets do. Planets are agents of change in an astrology chart. Not only are they agents of change, but I think it is very helpful to think about planets as people. They are each a person with a particular type of personality or inclination, not unlike you and I. Each planet wants to create change in accordance to its personality or the things that it values. Venus values beauty, artistry, and harmony, while the Sun values individuality, authority, and will, just as an example. They each bring about these things, kind of in their own way, just as you or I might have different interpretations of an art project or an art assignment, for example. A very common metaphor for the planets is that they are the actors in our birth chart, and that is very true. They are the beings that act. They act and make change based on the movements that they will do or have done in a natal chart, the configurations that they are in with other planets, and the positions or houses or signs that they fall into. All of this information will change color and contextualize what exactly a planet is doing or is capable of doing, but it is only the planet that we look at and regard this way. Signs do not make changes. Houses do not make changes. They are areas where... Lee, come here. Yeah. Signs do not make changes. Houses do not make changes. They serve as areas where planets can affect change. So it is best to think of planets as actors that produce change in the areas of the birth chart that they are assigned, either through their position or even through their rulerships of specific signs on certain houses. But that is all information for future videos. So while this video maybe didn't have all of the answers that many would have hoped for, I'm not somebody who pretends to have all of the answers to everything. More than anything, I hope that this video and the information in it helps to kind of start conversations or to encourage one's own internal philosophizing about what it is that makes something a planet and makes something as impactful or important as a planet. The astrological community in general has sort of failed to address this point, partly because getting us to be unified about anything is super hard, and because I expect you don't want to step on and hurt many people's feelings, which I totally understand. But I really think there needs to be some sort of housekeeping done to clean up the basics, to not only make them a little bit more accessible to people who are getting involved in astrology, but also to make it more sort of defensible or understandable to people who, the outside world who already doesn't want to understand us very well. So while I think these conversations and the housekeeping is necessary, I also don't think we need to be that hard on ourselves, because even astronomers waited until basically the very last minute to come up with any sort of actual working criteria for what a planet is. If they can do it, we can too. And while I don't really think it's super important that the community as a whole agrees on what is and isn't a planet, I do think it's important for individual astrologers to be able to determine that for themselves, to be able to convey that information to a client or student other than defaulting to the tired, it works for me, which is actually not a compelling argument. But thank you everybody so much for watching this. Hopefully it's kind of sparked some internal discussions, and hopefully you'll join me next time where we do a little bit less philosophizing and definition seeking and a little bit more practical application for the meanings of the planets.